everyone, welcome back to the American Juche Study Group. I'm Noah Schenk, and I'm the founder of it. I'm a Korean American and an anti-imperialist activist. I'm also the editor of this new text. Well, it's newish at this point. It's a couple months old. Juche for American Workers, Volume 1, which compiles the writings of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-Il, and will be the text used for our weekly study sessions every Tuesday at 10 p.m. The American Juche Study Group is a broad initiative, including people of all races, religious backgrounds, and political affiliations who are interested in learning the ideology of the Korean Revolution. We bring with us a spirit of intellectual charity and goodwill toward all humankind. We refuse to accept the hateful caricature of North Korea presented in American media, and instead want to learn the ideas that have held the DPR together for so long and enabled it to withstand circumstances that would most certainly cause any other government on earth to fall. We come with open minds and diversity of thought. We share one goal: peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, in the context of a world without poverty or war, in which every nation is enabled to grow and thrive to its fullest potential. We ask that if you're studying with us today, you could please donate a small contribution of just $5. It would really help with not only this study session and producing texts like this that educate Americans about anti-imperialist ideology, but all of the actions that the Center for Political Innovation does. We do a lot of important work, not only around the Korean Peninsula, but around spreading anti-imperialist politics in the United States. It would really be super helpful if you could donate $5. I'd also like to remind you guys that these study sessions are public. You know, if you are so inclined and you feel you have something to contribute, or even if you just want to hang out, I guess, I don't know, you can follow the link that's in the chat and you can join live. So there you go. So this week we're going to be talking about we're going to be reading Talk with an American Evangelist, which actually comes from when Billy Graham, the famous televangelist, evangelical Christian. I don't know much about him. I'm not from a religious background, but I'm sure some of our members are much more familiar when he came to the DPRK. So that's actually the opening quote. "I warmly welcome you, Mr. Billy Graham, to my country. I am delighted to be making a friend of you, a celebrated American evangelist, after you have come such a long way to visit our country." Yeah, I mean, I think we can move on to the next slide because that's not much. But yeah, Kim Il-sung was welcoming Billy Graham. He came actually to the DPRK twice, once in 1992, and then he came back in 1994. Other people have pointed out it's a far cry from his son Franklin Graham, who's like an arch Zionist, a total warmonger. But Billy Graham, he actually sort of believed, what he was preaching. I think he was a true believer. He was a believer in spreading the gospel, and we actually have a recording of him talking about, which we'll play shortly. But the other quote is that we hope that DPRK-U.S. relations will improve. It is not impossible for two countries to become friendly. I believe that it is possible if the U.S. adopts a friendly approach towards us. He continues, "I think that the U.S. president and I can meet at an appropriate time and exchange opinions on improving relations between our two countries. If things go well, a new spring may begin in the relationship. I want you to convey that, what I have said to your president." Actually, Billy Graham, he gets a lot of credit for being a not only an important evangelist and somebody who was spreading the gospel to the northern half of the Korean Peninsula, but he was also somebody who was relaying messages, sort of acting as a middleman between President Clinton at the time and envoys to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. In 1991, I believe it was both halves of the Korean Peninsula. In 1991, 1992, he gave a speech before over 1 million people in Seoul. And then, later he then went on to the DPRK and he went on a speaking tour, actually, which I feel like right now is an appropriate time. I think we can just listen to a little bit of what he had to say about, traveling to the Korean Peninsula.
In America. And that gave me a wide opening for the gospel. And so the first part, I had 3 parts. The first part, I told a little bit about the early history of America and religious life in America and the impact and the great universities in the East that had been raised up as a result of Christian teaching. And then the second part was the impact of religion on America today. And I told them about what God was doing throughout the country today. Then my third point is, what is a Christian? And I spent more time on that than any other point. And I just preached the gospel. And I was going to do that. And then they said, well, we go into the students now. I thought that was it. We went in, and here was the hall, the lecture hall, jammed and packed with students and faculty. And I gave my address, and Steve Linton interpreted for me. And together, just like 1-2, we gave the gospel. It was a tremendous privilege that no one has ever had in 42 years. And then we went to the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church was similar to the Protestant Church, except in the Catholic Church, the leader read a document that somebody had prepared for him, and he attacked the United States, and he attacked South Korea, and he attacked the various political things. And when I got up, I just gave them John 3:16 and the cross of Christ, because they had so many crosses in the building. I could just point to this incident and that one, and tell about the gospel all the way through. And nobody seemed to be offended. Of course, I didn't give an invitation to receive Christ, but I did have one man grip me on the shoulder, and he said, I found God. That's all the results I saw as far as I could see, but they'll be in the months and the years to come, because I was told that they're going to take my lecture that I gave at the university, and they're going to print it, and they're going to study it and restudy it and read it and reread it and print it and reprint it all over the country. And if that's true, they'll know how to find Christ. Because we were sowing seed, and that's the way I feel that I am. I'm a seed sower. I'm just throwing seed out, and it's up to the Holy Spirit to bring the fruit, and there will be fruit. In any event, it's a great privilege to be here with you, and I'm delighted to give you this little report of what God is doing in faraway places and closed places, how God opens them up in the most mysterious way, and how when we leave, we believe that God has worked.
Yeah, and Billy Graham, he was a staunch anti-communist. This is not somebody who is like ideologically a communist who like decided to go to the DPRK. This was somebody who was just a Republican evangelical Christian. He went to the DPRK, and they opened the doors for him. I mean, they had built two large churches, they had built two large churches, one Protestant and one Catholic. And I believe at the same time that Billy Graham was in the DPRK, the Vatican actually sent us an envoy to convey a verbal message to the people of Korea. And this was part of, in the 90s, North Korea was not doing the best financially. You had the arduous March period, and part of their seeking foreign investment and, wanting to have an opening up was inviting people like Billy Graham in to speak. But what's funny is that Billy Graham actually had to apologize for that statement. You had various human rights groups, so-called human rights groups, so-called Christian advocacy groups, that came out and said that Billy Graham must have, he believed his lying eyes, and despite the fact that he saw that it was not illegal to be a Christian, he said that he didn't really see evidence of there being persecution of Christian, that people didn't really seem that very religious, and that a lot of them hadn't heard a lot of the ideas that he was espousing, but that North Korea was not so insecure that they were incapable of listening to that. And he was canceled. He actually had to apologize for that, which I find to be very funny. The so-called free and open West, couldn't handle that little break in propaganda. But I want to hear people's reactions to this talk. Yeah, Caleb, go ahead.
I just want to give some background on Billy Graham. I want to first say that was not the first time that he had done that and gone to a socialist country, said that they are able to practice Christianity freely, and then come back to America and apologized. In, I believe, the early 80s, Billy Graham went to the Soviet Union. And he preached in the Orthodox Church in Moscow. And he said there were more people at that church than there were at his church in North Carolina. And he just said that on national television, and he said, no, it's a lie that they're persecuting Christians in the Soviet Union. And he again was, forced to apologize. So you almost wonder if this is like some sleight of hand by U.S. intelligence. Like they send him there, he talks nice, and then he apologizes for it when he gets back or something. When Billy Graham went to the Soviet Union in the 80s, it was clearly part of, the USA trying to expand its influence in the Soviet Union. No question about it, right? It was part of, when there was a kind of an inflow of American figures. That's when there was a joint television show special between, I think Phil Donahue and the Muppets did like a joint TV special with, in the 1980s and stuff like that. But the other thing about Billy Graham that's interesting is, so, he's from North Carolina, and he's a fundamental Baptist preacher from North Carolina. But his claim to fame, the way he became famous, was after World War II, he went to England. And he toured England, giving these kind of tent revival Baptist preaching sermons after the Second World War. And I guess so many people in Britain had died from the bombing and stuff that there was like a big interest in religion among the population. And he toured the United Kingdom, and people in the UK had not seen that kind of American tent revival preaching before. British, you had the Catholicism, you had the Church of England, but you didn't really have that kind of American Southern preacher kind of stuff going on. And he was very, very effective. That's how he became famous. He was the spiritual advisor of Richard Nixon. And tapes have leaked of him talking about how much power the Israel lobby has. And even though Billy Graham publicly supported Israel, behind closed doors, he actually said a lot of really, stuff that would be, considered anti-Semitism today about how much power the Israel lobby has. You can go listen to that on YouTube. There's a lot of Billy Graham and Richard Nixon talking about, how Israel has power over the United States. Israel has power over the media, things like that. So that's kind of interesting with Billy Graham, but he was a conservative, and his son today is just one of the most disgusting Israel apologists you've ever seen. But like you said, no, I would consider Billy Graham to be at least sincere. I think he clearly believed what he was saying. Maybe not on the Israel thing, because we heard what he said behind closed doors. But, I think he was sincere to some degree or other. And that, the fact that he would go to socialist countries, say Christianity was, openly being practiced freely, and then have to back down and apologize when he came back. That's kind of interesting. So, yeah.
Looks like Unanimous has something to
say.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I also think there's who has a dog.
Just keep talking. It's
I was gonna say. I also think there's a mosque in North Korea too. But I don't think there's that much of an Islamic history on the Korean Peninsula, so it's mostly for the diplomats of Iran. And it's interesting because North Korea and Iran are very close. North Korea was very close to Syria, the government of Syria. The families were very close. But yeah, it's amazing to me that North Korea let the Iranians build a mosque on their grounds, this,
Yeah, John.
Yeah. So in other words, he went to North Korea, and they let him speak freely the truth, and then he came back here, and the U.S. government and U.S. establishment forced him to make a public confession, and re-educated him.
Right, and I had remembered that he had said stuff like that. But if you try and find statements that he made, using Google or AI, Google is sure to tell you, no, Billy Graham would never say that you can practice Christianity freely. And then you have to dig through archives of yes, he went to the DPRK, and then you have to dig through to find that recording, and then it's tucked away on a website related to his family, and it's just the audio recording. There's no video or anything like that, and it's really interesting stuff. And he talks about You know, it was his first time in Korea, and they were so welcoming. They let him stay in a mansion that is typically only reserved for foreign leaders. It was like diplomats from China would stay there, and diplomats from the Soviet Union would stay there. And they had like a special chef, and they would eat Korean food. And how much he loved Korean food, and he would have kimchi with every dinner. You know, and he would just talk to them about you know, about being a Christian and stuff like that. And they seemed interested. And I think you know, it's really all fascinating stuff, but like it's like they don't want you to see it. It's interesting.
They tried to make it. I think I read somewhere that they tried to make it seem like the Soviets, when he went to the Soviet Union to one of their churches, that this was like a sham church. Like, it's not a real church. It's just staged. Like, they always try to make it seem like the North Koreans and the Soviets have this magic power to like put together like they look at these countries like it's a Broadway production, like they're just putting on Broadway productions.
Yeah, well, that's the attack that I always heard when I was in school on East Germany, because I took German class. That was I took German in high school. That was my foreign language. And so we had to learn a little bit about East Germany, even though a lot of it was propaganda. And the attack was like, oh, well, like the center of East Berlin was very, very nice. But like if you go out from the city center where people were actually living, it was not as nice as the city center, because they wanted it to be like a model city, but that was all a sham, and people were actually not living in good conditions. It's like, that's how every city is. You have a very nice city center where there's like shopping centers and there's like big buildings and stuff like that. And then where people actually live, it's not as nice. Have you been to New York City? Like, have you been to Boston? Have you been to Austin? Have you been to? That's how every city is. That's how cities work.
Well, speaking of that whole thing, and that's always what you say when you come back from an anti-imperialist country. They say you only saw what they wanted you to see. You didn't actually see it. You know, I must tell the story. I've actually never been to Cuba. I was supposed to go to Cuba, and the week that I was supposed to go to Cuba, I got hired by Press TV, so I didn't end up going because it was a job. So, but my roommate at the time, who was an Occupy Wall Street activist, she went to Cuba. And she went to Cuba with the Venceremos Brigades. She absolutely loved it. And she came back and she loved Cuba. And then she went home to Thanksgiving dinner with her family. And they said to her, oh, no, you didn't really see Cuba. You only saw what they wanted you to see. And so the next year she went back to Cuba with the Venceremos Brigades. And she was going to see the real truth. She wasn't going to let him fool her that time. And she loved it even more. And she came back and told her family, no, I did see the real Cuba, and you're completely wrong. And I loved that. I thought that was really, really awesome. And still to this day, she's a very big supporter of Cuba. She was an Occupy Wall Street activist who I'm still in touch with. So there you go. I just wanted to share that story.
Mm. Speaking of like so-called values that we pretend to really love, I think the next quote from Kim Il-sung is actually relevant to that. You say that you have realized in your stay in the DPRK that Americans too have things to learn here. I'm going to continue to read. It would be good if you take this opportunity to tour. It's on page 82 if folks want to follow along, by the way. It would be good if you take this opportunity to tour various places in my country and acquaint yourself with the reality here. In my country, there is no gulf between rich and poor as there is in the US and other countries which claim to be developed. I have heard that in the US, there are many people without shelter who sleep on the street or beg for food or money or are addicted to drugs or unemployed. You say that in your country, many people are unemployed and living outdoors or under bridges without shelter. You know this because you yourself live there. It is said that although the US is a developed country, there is a lot of crime there. When I met a home visiting Korean scholar who used to live in the US, he told me there are many robbers in America. You must always have $500 or so on you when you go out in the street so that you have some money to hand over immediately. Armed robbers, they demand it. Otherwise, you will be shot and killed. In my country, there is no one who lives in the open without shelter or begs for money. Neither are there drug addicts, thieves, or homeless people. All our people have a house and are living happily, free from worries about food and unemployment. There is no one who is particularly rich or poor. Everyone is equally well off. Now, there is some stuff about, Jessica, go ahead.
Oh.
You had something to say.
Oh, no, you finish, and I'll make a point later.
Oh yeah,
Please.
no, I was gonna say like it's funny, like these are things that you read about the Book of Acts, right? The Book of Acts. That's where the thing that's often attributed to Marx, right? About from each according to their ability to each according to their needs. That's often attributed to Karl Marx, right? But actually, that comes from the Bible. He's referencing the Book of Acts. Like the context of that quote is that he was attacking a sort of utopian Christian socialists who wanted to just make everybody equal. And he was saying, well, no, actually, you can't be equal. Only after you have, created a point of development where you could have, where there was so much opportunity that the need for a state, that the need for inequality would fade away. Only then would you have this Christian ideal of from each according to their ability to each according to their needs. He's sort of like making fun of them in a way. He's sort of taunting them. But, that is what's often attributed to Marx. And it's funny. It's like, Billy Graham is even sort of acknowledging it's like, well, I guess we could kind of learn things from the DPRK because it's like they're very much living in a way that is in accordance with the New Testament in some sense of the word. Although I don't really agree with the highlighting income inequality thing. That's not really a thing that I like to do. But Jessica, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, because I was in Germany and I decided to go and do a pilgrimage. Now, Thomas Müntzer was the patron saint of East Germany. Okay, so here you have this nonsense, right? Where they would say, "Oh, in West Germany, that's they're religious in West Germany, but East Germany, oh, they're atheists and they attack the church." But in fact, West Germany didn't have a patron saint. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Let me qualify that. Yes, they do have a patron saint. It was the golden calf. But um, but but in East Germany, you literally had a saint, which is Thomas Müntzer. I went to Bad Frankenhausen, and you have a memorial there to the German peasant rebellion, where over 100,000 peasants were murdered. And this is dedicated, by the way, to Thomas Müntzer, who was a proto-communist in Germany. And when I asked locals, it was very interesting. They said, well, the East German government spent millions of dollars to build this beautiful memorial, and we had all different little things around the town. And now we're always fighting since reunification because every time we're putting up something, they're always taking it down. And they keep arguing, well, we're a secular government, you can't put that up. So just a little tidbit about the hypocrisy of the West.
Yeah, unanimous. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that's an interesting input. Like I was talking to someone earlier today. What's one thing you don't notice in China when you see Chinese cities, you see ex-Soviet cities, East German cities? I'm sure this exists, but you don't see like big empty lots. Like right behind me, there's a few empty lots. There's an empty lot. It's just overgrown grass. There's no businesses. There's no houses. I mean, there are tents. And that's about it. But yeah, I don't see that. I don't hear people in China complaining about how there are empty lots. There are just these places where, where the homeless people sleep.
Yeah, it's funny. There was a common attack on China a little while ago was, oh, well, China is just hiding the fact that they do have homeless people because if you're homeless in China in one of the big cities, then they just ship you back to the countryside. And it's like, well, what was conveniently omitting there is that the Chinese constitution guarantees you the right to housing. And that a huge part of the Chinese Revolution was a massive land reform where peasants were given plots of land on the, in the countryside. And so, yeah, if you moved to a city to try and find economic opportunity and you were down on your luck and you were, stuck in the city, yeah, they would ship you back to where you had a house and you had land so that you could go be with your family and your family could take care of you. That's not the same thing as what we do in the US where they're trying to make it seem like it's the same thing.
They just move the homeless people from place to place to place.
It's not the same thing. There's a lot of that false equivalency sort of thing.
No, I had a similar experience. There was a guy from Belarus, and I remember I encountered him. I was selling a newspaper or something, and he said to me, he said, Alexander Lukashenko, he says there's no homelessness in Belarus. That's bullshit. You know what they do? They just put all the homeless people in mental hospitals. And I said, well, aren't you guaranteed housing in Belarus? And he said, yes. I said, so if you're still homeless and you're guaranteed housing, you probably are crazy. And he paused for a minute and he said, yeah, that's probably true.
It's interesting. There's a guy who's running for mayor of LA. You've seen him. He's an ex-reality star. I don't know if any of you guys follow the LA mayoral race. Looks like all the candidates suck. But one of them was saying like, we should just start throwing the homeless people in mental institutions. That's part of why we had a homelessness crisis. And it was because like we closed down all these state and federally owned mental institutions.
Well, that's part of it.
Actually, that's not true at all. I worked with the Census Bureau for more than 20 years. What it is that people just happen to see people who are drug addicts and people who are mentally ill on the streets. If you are, the number one group who are homeless in the United States are the elderly, beginning with elderly women, then elderly men, Black women who work with children, white women, drug addicts, and mentally ill. They're not even in the top 10 anymore, and they haven't been for a long time. The issue is that if you're a woman with children, you're not going to go beg on the street. You're not going to make yourself out there, because if you do, the state will take your kids away. And, your kids can be gone. In New Jersey, many children are just gone. They don't even know what happened to them once they get into the foster care system. They probably were sex trafficked. If you're an elderly woman or man, you can be put into an old person's home. So, it's really an issue. So it's just we don't see these people. In the case of people who are mentally ill or who are drug addicts, the state encourages them. They don't get arrested for being loud and in your face. And this is done on purpose to give this false impression that people who are homeless in the United States, they all have drug addiction problems and they all have mental health problems, when in fact, like I said, they don't even come up to the top 10% of the top 10 of homeless people. And quickly, I was in Belarus, and it's true, I didn't see any homeless people. And yet, when I was in Poland, Poland has a homeless problem. Now, when you ask the Polish government, all the people who are homeless, they're all Ukrainian refugees and they're all alcoholics. I didn't find that to be the case at all. I found that most of the people who were homeless were elderly, which was really shocking to me. And I was told that a lot of these elderly people, they didn't have enough to live on because of their pension, so they sold their homes. And so what happens then, at some point that money runs out and you become homeless. So anyway,
I have
just wanted to bring up that I didn't see any homelessness at all in Belarus, unlike Poland.
I have one thing, and then I wanted to pivot. I was gonna say, yeah, one thing I noticed that when I was in Russia is there, in any country, any anti-imperialist country, you will run into occasionally the kind of person who's been completely brainwashed by Western media, right? And they think that the West is a paradise. And there are certain people, it's like you would explain to them that homelessness exists in the United States, and they would not believe you, right? Because America is so wealthy. Why would there be homeless people? Like, that's just something that the government made up. And I've read that actually, during this, during the latter part of the Soviet Union, like when communist delegations would like come to the Soviet Union, right? And, they would say, oh yeah, in America, we have huge problems with homelessness, and like the police, they just like beat you up for no reason. Like people would be like, yeah, you actually believe that? You know what I mean? That's obviously something that the government like made up to scare us, which is very, it's funny. It's funny and it's sad in a lot of ways. But then Jessica was actually making a good point. I believe that I've read that too, that actually a majority of the people a lot of the people who are homeless actually work full time. That's actually something that's quite a huge tragedy is that
I
a
also
lot
think
of
a lot
people
of
who are
the
homeless work 40 hours a week. And I can say from my personal experience as a young person, like if, for a lot of young people, if you don't have like somebody who's willing to like let you live with them for like a couple of years, or you're not lucky enough to have, a credit score that will allow you to like live in student housing for a period of time before you move out, or you didn't happen to save $10,000, while you were a teenager working a part-time job or something, like if your parents aren't
oh,
around, like you're going to end up homeless.
oh yeah,
I mean,
for
that's
sure.
just a
I
reality
I live at
of our
home with
lives.
my mom. I'm 20.
But yeah, exactly.
Gavin had something.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just wanted to briefly respond to Dan's comment, Dan the Now Man. He said, when religion is evangelical, it can be a slippery slope between sharing genuine love and psychological mind control. And I'm sorry, I can't see the rest of that comment. But Dan, I think you're overgeneralizing, because evangelical evangelical Christianity was quite prominent in Korea, and to a certain extent still is. And it's fully anti-imperialist there. In fact, right now in Venezuela and Nicaragua, evangelical churches and fundamentalist churches are supporting the government against the mainline churches, which have been largely captured by the Western imperialists. So it's not as simple as you're making it out to be.
Well, Gavin, actually, I was hoping that you would be here earlier, but I understand that you had stuff going on. But I don't know if you listened to the clip, the snippet that we shared of Billy Graham. But you were actually a fundamental Baptist, so I'd be curious to hear your perspective on like what he saw and what he said he saw in the DPRK. Did you listen to any of that?
Oh, this is such a relevant episode. Oh, I'm sorry, no, I didn't see this particular comment. I have seen or read Billy Graham's comment about the Soviet Union, where he said that there was full freedom of religion, and he was attacked by some of the neocons back in this country, the United States, for saying that, for admitting that. And so I'm very sorry I'm late. I totally forgot about this, to be honest. It's such a relevant episode. So yeah, what was he saying in a nutshell? I know he met with Kim Il-sung, but I don't know the details.
He was talking about his experience, how they basically they took him on a speaking tour, and they took him to two big churches in Pyongyang, one that was Catholic and one that was Protestant, and he spoke at both of them, and that he just basically like preached the gospel at people, and that actually they said that they were going to reprint his sermons and that they were going to study them, and they asked him what Christianity meant to the American people, and he gave a big sermon about what Christianity was and what it meant to them, and then he said that at the end of his sermon, a young person like said that they had found God through him.
That's amazing. I guess some good does come out of the Billy Graham Crusades. He's kind of a liberal to me. He's kind of a worldly Christian. He's not my favorite, but he has done some good things, and this is definitely one of them. So I'm learning about this. This kind of reminds me of an Anna Louise Strong, her book In North Korea. She met a pastor who was a Christian pastor who was a prominent official in the DPRK government. And there were a few of them actually in the DPRK government, high-ranking government officials who were Christian pastors. And, she was trying to she said, like, what denomination are you? And they had some trouble with the communication, and the guy didn't know the word for like Reformed Presbyterian. So he goes, Calvin. But I later found out that guy's church was bombed and destroyed, along with, of course, all the other churches in the country, because, most of the buildings in the entire country were destroyed by the USA imperialists in their
It goes even deeper than
Korean
that,
Holocaust, and that this runs so counter to everything we're taught in the USA, because Korean Christianity was destroyed by the USA, and it's been yes, it is simplistic, Dan, and it's been restored to a certain extent by the DPRK government. It just they lie in our USA schools. They say every communist ever tried to destroy religion.
As far as the fact that Christianity is not as widely practiced as it once was in the DPRK. I mean, Kim Il Sung is actually going to go. It goes even deeper than the U.S. imperialist bombings of the churches. Later in this essay, actually, he's going to talk a little bit about what the Japanese imperialists did, and why that was included. But that'll be a little later. I worry. I don't want to make it seem like the DPRK is some paradise or whatever. And of course, we are learning the Juche ideology, and part of the Juche ideology is this next quote. Which I think is important, for people to, Americans say they like the USA side, the US style, but we prefer our own style. You believe in God, but we believe in man, not in God. Man is the master of everything. It is better to believe in man than in God. That is why we regard the people as heaven and devote our all to them. I mean, there are some things that I feel, certain people who are believers in God, may not appreciate in that comment. It might strike them as a bit insensitive, but this is part of the Juche ideology, and I think that's what's important is that it's not necessarily that it's not the pessimistic sort of Malthusian, well, humans suck, and so that's why there's no God sort of atheism that comes from that leaks from a lot of leftist discourse in the United States. Actually, what he's saying is that, well, human beings are masters of our environment, right? And that you need to have faith in humanity's godlike potential. And in some ways, he was saying that, they reject materialism. He says that because we have faith that human beings are the master of everything, that human beings are so unique and that they can change their environment, and that's such an important thing for us to understand, and that if we regard our people as sacred and we try to make their lives as best as possible and improve them, then in some ways that's better than just having faith, right? He's saying that in some ways we're living truer to Christian values in spite of the fact that we're atheistic. I feel folks probably have comment on this or pushback on this.
Yeah, obviously I don't personally agree with the comment here from Kim Il Sung, but I think a lot of Americans could agree with it. It's a very humanist comment. Lots of Americans consider themselves to have humanist values, and I definitely think Kim Il Sung had better values than the American Humanist Association does, which is largely, a lot of the people in it are pro-imperialist. I used to be in it when I was a kid. And I think that, it's like we always say, okay, for like, I don't think that I haven't seen any evidence as a fundamentalist. I haven't seen any evidence that Kim Il Sung ever believed the true gospel, though it's possible he did, because he has a Presbyterian background, and maybe he read John 3:16 in the Bible or something. But the clear point I'm trying to make is that what we're taught about tolerance in school, it's true, but the reverse is true. So what I mean to say is there are good atheists like Joseph Stalin and Kim Il Sung, and there are bad atheists like Bill Gates and Michael Shermer. There are good atheists there are good Christians and bad Christians, and etc. Yeah.
Right. It's like any ideology. What does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to be a communist? Does being a communist mean that you support anti-imperialist countries, or does it mean that, you think that, you really enjoyed your gender studies class when you were in college? What does it mean to be a Christian? Does it mean that you strive to live for others, and that you strive to be gentle and forgiving of other people, and to live and to be Christ-like? Or does it mean that, you go to church on Easter and on Christmas? You know what I mean? Like, what is the, the ideology, what you call yourself is less important than the practice, I think. And I think too, this is something that is unique to the Juche ideology, or at least in that it separates itself from Marxism, Leninism proper, is the idea that like human beings are the masters of the universe in some ways, that they're empowered with a sort of godlike creative potential, which I think is, even down to the, it's the hammer, the sickle, and the paintbrush, right? Because human beings are creative. I think that's fascinating.
Go ahead. Penny hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah. Well, what that comment kind of triggered in me is that, kind of like how Wallace Waddles talks about that there's, in the churches, there's so much focus on love God, love God, love God, love God. And there's other in the world, it's love man, love man, love man, but there's just pure love. And if you get, there's so much evil that can be done by those who claim to love God. And, you know, I've experienced it too. So I think that, you know, the Wallace talks about don't think that you have to sacrifice yourself entirely to serve man, but let God live through you, and then others will see that and come along. It's kind of like when the Bible says that they'll glorify God through your works or something like that. And so I think it's, you don't want to be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. You have to take care of the world and the people, and not, you know, not just say, well, God cares. Like in James, it says, don't just, you know, say be well and good and say a prayer for them. Actually feed and clothe your brother and visit him in prison. And I think the Zionist ideology also pushed that there's nothing Christians can do. So just wait till Jesus comes back and fixes everything. And that makes it just a lazy approach, and you don't do anything. So that's what I see it as. You have to take care of the people around you and not just say, I love God and whatever that means.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to, you mentioned Zionism. I think Kwame Ture brought up once that Theodore Herzl was an atheist. I mean, I'm an atheist, but like Zionism is supposedly this religious movement. You can read the Bible and it's justified. The Jews were promised the land. But the founder of Zionism was apparently an atheist. I don't know how
Most
much
of the founders of Zionism were atheists.
Most Zionists are atheists, yeah. If you press them, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought that was just something people said. Like, there was a joke on this show called House, like where Dr. House was saying, half the Jews I know are atheists. Like,
Well, the Christian Zionism was part of the British Empire to get the Christians to support moving the Jews there to Palestine. And so, like Caleb was saying, in Thomas Massey's district, it's mostly evangelical Christians that voted him out, because that's what you hear in church, is you have to support Israel no matter what. And you know, the promise to Abraham in the Old Testament that this land is going to be yours forever, and then some third temple and the red heifer, and Jesus is going to come back to Jerusalem in the 1,000-year reign. And so it's infiltrated into the Christian religion, and there's so much money is raised through that too.
And I think that we sometimes have to, like, I mean, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, you're required to agree with me or anything, but I think that sometimes different things on this get conflated together, because I believe there's going to be a literal 1,000-year reign, and I am premillennial, but I'm not dispensational and I'm not Zionist, and those things predate Christian Zionism in terms of beliefs. And also with regard to the Abraham thing, I mean, that was not an unconditional promise. There were conditions, and you see in the Bible that the Israelites getting taken out of the land when they're disobedient, then finally led back in, getting taken out again. And of course, they were expelled ultimately when they rejected Jesus. But that's really kind of a whole nother topic than for today. But
yeah,
I mean, any imperialist ideology is going to use whatever existing religions and secular movements at its disposal to
that's another thing
to reinforce itself. I grew up around a lot. Hold on. I grew up around a lot of atheist Zionists, and I know Penny knew a lot of Christian Zionists, and you know, especially in the USA, that's a huge part of the population is Christian Zionists. And so, unfortunately, there are actually in some countries, you know, Eritrea has millions of Muslim Zionists who are black. So go figure.
Yeah, I think Caleb has something to say, and then we got to keep it moving because we're like halfway through.
Yeah, just getting us back to Korea. You know, Gavin had mentioned that when Kim Il Sung, or that when Anna Louise Strong went to North Korea, she met an elected official who was a Christian. So the way they did it on the Korean Peninsula was that and this was the same thing they did in most countries liberated by the Soviet Union after World War II, is that they didn't just like put the Communist Party in charge, because the Communist Party wasn't a big enough percentage of the population to be representative. That what they did is it was called what they called a people's democratic government or a people's democracy, where they merged all the anti-fascist, or in the Korean case, anti-Japanese parties. They had them have a coalition government. So in the Korean Peninsula, it was the Communist Party, the Social Democratic Party, and the Christian Party, 3 different parties. And then they merged together eventually to form the Korean Workers' Party. And it was like that in East Germany. It was the Social Democratic Party, some other parties, and the Communist Party. They eventually formed the Socialist Unity Party. And that the People's Democratic model was, merging the different parties into one. And so the Christian Party was part of the founding of North Korea.
Right.
Just briefly,
So
Jessica
I think
said,
we move on to-
traditional Orthodox Jews do not believe in the state of Israel. It states in the Old Testament the Jews are not allowed to return until the Messiah comes. To return before is a sin, as is speaking Hebrew, a sacred language. Yep, very true. Sadmar, where our New York people are, the second largest Orthodox Jewish denomination in the world, is anti-Zionist. Yep.
We're gonna have to table that for now, because we're running short on time, and
We're running short on time, guys.
Yeah. So
the next quote, I think we're gonna blast through this quote, and then we're gonna go to the next one. Next. Yeah. So if they come to our country and witness the reality here and meet the people, speaking of, because this is actually somewhat related to Zionism, actually, and the reality here, meet the people, they will be well aware of how preposterous a lie is the claim that North Koreans are monsters with horns on our heads, and they will no longer believe their propaganda. And you might hear like, this is like, certain some Zionists will, they'll claim like things that like, non-Jews believe that that Jewish people have horns. But this is NPR. This is an imperialist source. A huge percentage of the South Korean population in the 70s and 80s legitimately believed, like he's not being hyperbolic when he says like, oh, they think that the North Koreans are monsters with horns. Like, they literally believed that North Koreans all had horns and claws. And that was like put in the textbooks in schools in South Korea.
Wow.
That was like the US imperialists put in the textbooks in South Korea that in the North, everybody has horns and claws. And you want to talk about like, there's so much propaganda out there about, oh, in North Korea, they believe that Kim Jong-Un invented the cheeseburger. Can you believe how ridiculous that is? In North Korea, they believe that, Kim Jong-Un, he played a perfect golf game on his first try. By the way, none of that is true. It's like, it all comes from like South Korean tabloids or like confessions by defectors made under duress. But in South Korea, like, a huge percentage of the population literally believes that North Koreans have horns and claws. Like, anyway, that's just how ridiculous. Anyway, next quote. Okay. So here we're going to get into a little bit about, we talked a little bit about, Gavin touched on this a little bit earlier about how during the Korean War, actually a huge percentage of the churches were destroyed. When Billy Graham came to the DPRK, he talks about how, oh, well, he only really saw 2 churches and, they don't really know stuff about Christianity and stuff like that. And that's sort of presented like it's this abstract thing where like the North Koreans, they just decided, well, like Christianity bad or stuff like this. And, Kim Il-sung actually sort of explains the reason why, part of the reason why Pyongyang used to be the Jerusalem of the East, and it sort of gradually became less religious. And part of it actually is the subjugation of Japan, from Japan. And Billy Graham's wife is actually from Korea, and she was originally from Pyongyang. So he references, as your wife studied in Pyongyang before Korea's liberation, she must know the city well. The Japanese imperialists who were occupying Korea at the time told foreigners, including the Christians, who reside in Korea, to leave if they are not prepared to pay respects at their shrines, as they themselves did. I think that was why your wife left Pyongyang. We are aware of what was happening in those days. Even the Korean Christian priests were expelled. The Reverend Kim Sung-Irak, whom I know well and was exiled from Pyongyang and went to the U.S. He was following in his father's footsteps by becoming a priest. He visited his homeland in 1981 at the age of 80. When I met him, he told me that he was living in a priest village in Washington. He passed away a few years ago. that part of the subjugation of the Korean Peninsula was that they outlawed Christianity and forced them to practice Shinto religion. They forced them to practice like Japanese paganism, and the religion of the Japanese imperialists. But that often never gets talked about. I'm sure people, Gavin probably has stuff to say about this, and you can just go around. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. Nobody thinks of the Japanese Empire as being anti-Christian. It's always the anti-communist Red Scare propaganda that we're given that overshadows that. In
Right,
fact, some of that I'm hearing for the first time. Go ahead.
Yeah, and Kim Il-sung's not saying like, oh, well, this is awesome, right? It was awesome that he was like, no, I have like close friends who like had to flee Korea because they weren't allowed to practice their religion anymore. Like, that was horrible. And, that a huge part of our subjugation was that people weren't allowed to practice their religion and practice Christianity. That's part of why it's so important for us to invite Christians back here. That's something you won't hear. You won't hear in American media.
You won't hear that about Syria either, because what's his name, Al-Jilani took over, and they're persecuting every religious minority, but we don't hear about that, do we?
Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of why I'm an atheist, but I kind of had some sympathies with Iran and Syria, like going after ISIS. I mean, I'm an American first. I believe in the right to believe, And it's interesting that America preaches these values and then will support people like ISIS. And this goes back to like the 60s and 50s when they supported the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the USA's long war against Christianity is undeniable, in my opinion. I mean, when you look at the countries that the USA has violently overthrown, there is a pattern of them being friendly to Christianity. And when you look at ones we haven't thrown, like Saudi, or haven't overthrown, like Saudi Arabia, or have not attacked, some of them are.
Yeah, well, I'll tell a story about that. Is right after Trump won the presidential election in 2016. I was working in Washington, D.C., and I was working with this camera guy who was very, very woke. And we went to the White House, and there were thousands of Egyptian Christians out in front of the White House saying, like, we love Donald Trump and thank you, Trump, and protect the Christians of Egypt, Trump, and all of this. And my camera guy was like, why are all these brown people liking Trump? And I said, that's because since the Egyptian so-called revolution, the Arab Spring, the Muslim Brotherhood has been persecuting them. And he's like, yeah, but they're brown. They should not like Trump. And I said, yeah, but Trump is critical of U.S. support for the Muslim Brotherhood. And I said things, about that. And I had to explain that to my camera guy who just couldn't, it just didn't fit, what he understood, that all these brown Egyptians liked Trump. Well, it was because U.S. foreign policy was backing the Muslim Brotherhood that was terrorizing the Coptic Christians of Egypt.
That was something I think a lot of Zionist sources did bring up as why. Like, I think there's a PragerU video talking about the Coptics. It's interesting because I think Sudan, they tried to break this was a very much an Israeli thing. They wanted to break South Sudan, mostly Christian South Sudan, away from North Sudan, which is like, I don't know if they're Arabs. They're Arabs, but they're like African Arabs. I haven't really looked into it, but they're Muslims. They speak Arabic, and Israel wanted the South Sudanese Christians to basically break away. I think Sudan was basically in this horrible civil war for the better part of its independence. Like, it was the Muslims versus the Christians.
Well, you're right. You're right. Go ahead.
Yeah, they always try to make it seem like it's an ethnic conflict, and they sort of obscure the reality that it's imperialism. And I remember they taught us about this conflict in like 7th grade, and like it was this amazing humanitarian struggle or something like that. And they just conveniently omitted all the like the geopolitical tensions and stuff like that. It's just, oh, these like lovely Sudanese Christians, they just want to come here because the Muslims are just so mean. Gavin, you had something to say.
Just say that, yeah, those are definitely fair points, Richard and Noah. And I think Zionists look for any excuse to criticize Muslims, and that's more what the Zionists' brief defense of Coptic Christians was about than anything. But I could be wrong.
It seems like it's about creating instability among Arab countries. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
They don't want anyone who's strong and powerful enough to take them down. That's why I think early on they were supporting the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, because this was in the 60s, and Egypt was the big country that was going after Israel under Nasser.
Well, anyway, back to Korea. I mean, but you'll notice you never hear you don't hear these people crying about how Japan should pay reparations to all of the churches that that were destroyed and stuff like that. There's no Victims of Japan Institute that talks about how you don't have conservative commentators talking about how the Japanese imperialism was a plot by certain ethnic groups to wipe out the Christian minorities and stuff like that. But communism is, and the reality of the situation is that, like the DPRK, I mean, yeah, they have an atheistic ideology, right? I mean, maybe they're not the most welcoming of religion that you could possibly be, but yeah, they were, that part of the subjugation of the Korean Peninsula was the outlawing of Christianity. And they've done their best to try and preserve Christianity in some form or other to the best of their ability, in spite of the fact that it was the United States' bombing campaigns that destroyed the majority of the churches there. And it was the Japanese who outlawed and expelled many of the Christian missionaries in the first place. So yeah, I think we can move. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say something. I mean, it was a strategic point to bomb those churches because you have the myth of the Christian, the European Christians and the U.S. is a Christian nation. It didn't want a situation where Americans would see Koreans as Christians, right? So it's the idea of demonizing them as people who are atheistic or practice satanic non-Christian beliefs. So I mean, it wasn't just some random bombing. The United States government literally was aimed at destroying those churches. It's the same thing in Israel. It's a policy to destroy Christian churches, so that there will not be a Christian presence, and then they could argue, oh, it's all those evil Muslims, because they do not want Americans and people in Europe to have any compassion towards other fellow Christians.
That's a good point, Jessica. And actually, the USA's aerial bombardment in the early 1950s did leave some of the Buddhist temples alone.
Yeah, like why? Because again, by design.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the Christians in Korea, because my grandmother's roommate is a conservative Christian, and he has one of these calendars, and they're like, pray for this dissident, and some of them were like people who were locked, Christian priests or pastors who were locked up in China and North Korea. And to me, this shows some hypocrisy, because people will act like China, the Soviet Union, Iran, like they'll say, oh, all Iranian Jews are basically government agents. Their churches always surveilled. It's always watched. But no, you will see at times blatant infiltration of American churches by all these different interest groups, not just AIPAC, but a lot of different like Zionist adjacent donors or
Well, in America, it's right. That's the classic thing. It's like, well, in these other countries, like there are certain things you're allowed to say and certain things you aren't allowed to say. It's like you're allowed to practice your religion, but like you can't have a religion that like is built into the into its ideology. Like we want to overthrow the government. And like in America, it's like, well, we have freedom of religion, but like if you get too big and you're too illiberal and too dissident, like we will destroy you. I mean, and I think of, I mean, speaking of churches that are heavily involved in the Korean Peninsula, including churches that had friendly relations with Kim Il Sung, I think of the Unification Church, right? And how, in spite of the fact that they were pretty pro-imperialist on a lot of issues, you know, virulently anti-communist, were very helpful during the Cold War. They were a huge church that was illiberal, that had practices that, you know, were a threat to the establishment in some way or other. And what did they do? You know, they created some bogus like tax fraud charge, and they just threw Irving Sun Young Moon in prison. And then they had the Korea Gate scandal, where all of these officials who were allegedly tied to South Korea, you know, just got thrown in prison. I mean, it's a very similar thing.
Yeah, no, I was more talking about how there were all these neocon think tanks trying to infiltrate American religion. Penny, I think you might know something or two about this.
Yeah,
This
guys,
might be
we're
your-
running close to time, so we have one more slide left.
Yeah, I was trying to
think-
wrap. That's
I just want to quickly, very quickly, what freedom of religion in the United States? Look at Waco. Waco's a perfect example. And let me tell you something. I know for a fact, speaking about what Unanimous is saying, in most churches in the United States, you cannot read the Acts of the Apostles. The CIA will come after you. I mean, I won't say anything more. That's it. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't heard of that. So the next slide is the last slide, and I think we're just going to end on a sort of a cheerful note about improved relations between our countries, and you know, sort of combating the idea that like the North Koreans all hate us and want to kill us, which is often. So our country breeds rainbow trout to supply to the people and to export. The rainbow trout our country raises originally came from the United States. Americans operated a gold mine in Yunsun long before Korea's liberation. At the time, they brought the fish from their country and bred them there. Then, several years before Korea's liberation, the Americans living there were forced by the Japanese to return to their country. They included those who were running the mine in Yunsun. Later, the Japanese took over the mine and raised the rainbow trout. So the miners were assumed it was Japanese who had introduced the rainbow trout. They hated the Japanese so bitterly that after Korea's liberation, they planned to exterminate all of the rainbow trout as a fish the Japanese had raised. On learning about this, I told them it was the Japanese imperialists, not the fish, that were bad, and it would be a good idea to protect and propagate the rainbow trout since there were only a few of them left. That is how the rainbow trout proliferated. Now they are raised across the country. I think that's a very sweet parable about you know, it's imperialism that is bad. Is what he's really saying is it's imperialism that is bad, and not the things that imperialism may have introduced that may be good. Right? It's imperialism that is bad, not evangelical Christianity is bad. It's imperialism that is bad, not Americans that are bad. I think that's a very sweet little parable. So I think we can end on that. And I just want to say one last time, I'd like to remind people that, you know, publishing these books and doing all the work that the Center for Political Innovation does is not cheap and it's not free. So if you'd like to support our work, we would really appreciate it if you could just give $5. The link is in the chat. You'll be able to donate. Thank you. So somebody else had something to say, and then we can wrap.
Who had something?
I heard somebody chime in when I was talking.
Okay. I was just going to say that before we go, before we play the closing music, I did want to play the video of Penny talking about Kim Il Sung at the University of Minnesota. So we'll put that on. And
I'm sorry, can I say something very quickly?
Yes, you
I was
can.
trying to get someone on the call tonight, but he couldn't get on. And so he had been, he's Australian, and he had been to North Korea and with a pastor. And he goes to North Korea every year and he brings Bibles. And the North Koreans, they welcome him. And I had asked a friend, that same friend, if there was any issue. And they're like, oh, no, they know that he's not involved in any color revolutions. He's a true man of God. And I can vouch for the fact that he really is. So just wanted to bring that out there, that they do allow evangelicals to come into the country and give out Bibles and preach.
Amen.
Very good. So now we can show Penny doing her amazing outreach that she does. And just a reminder to donate, guys, because what Penny does, it takes a lot of time, and it would really be helpful to be able to facilitate her to do that.
There you go. You ever seen this flower?
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, how you doing? You ever seen this flower?
No.
It's called Kim Il Sungya. Find out all about it. Hello. Have you seen this flower? Have you seen this flower?
I think so.
You can't get it in America.
Okay.
It's called Kim Il Sungya.
Oh.
Yeah, North Korea.
Yeah.
It's grown all over North Korea because in 1964, Kim Il-sung went to Indonesia and they were growing this flower, and President Sukarno named it after Kim Il-sung as a symbol of eternal friendship between Indonesia and North Korea.
Okay.
This is Penny Arcos, the regional captain for the Minnesota chapter of Center for Political Innovation. I've been out here at the University of Minnesota passing out these books for a couple hours about the Kim Il-sungya flower. Had a lot of positive reactions. Most people were curious. They don't know much about North Korea, but they were willing to learn. It's called Kim Il-sungya. Have you ever heard of it?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it grows all over North Korea. In 1964, Carl Ludwig was growing it in Indonesia, and Kim Il-sung visited Indonesia and saw how beautiful it was. And so Sukarno, the president, decided to name it after Kim Il-sung as a symbol of eternal friendship between Indonesia and North Korea. And shortly after that visit, America overthrew Indonesia. Hello. Have you ever seen this flower?
No.
It's called Kim Il-sungya. CIA gave the information to the military to slaughter thousands of Chinese ethnic people and the supporters of Sukarno, because he had been a populist leader. He built infrastructure and schools and wiped out illiteracy. Obama's mother brought him to Indonesia, where he married his stepfather, and they were part of this slaughter.
What organization is this?
Center for Political Innovation.
All right.
Have you ever heard of it?
Left wing, center, right wing.
Well, we are innovationists, so we don't claim left wing, right. We claim that we want a government of action that fights for working families so that nations can develop and trade with each other instead of having forever wars. And we can break free from the world that's run by Wall Street and London and have innovation for everyone.
Siblings might support it.
Okay.
Because they're kind of...
This is a monument they built in Senegal for their struggle, for their freedom against the colonialism, when they broke free of colonialism. And they made a monument in Senegal for their independence. They supported the Black Panthers and Cuba. North Korea supported the Black Panthers in their struggle against the FBI and repression. So the economic system, World Economic Forum, they want you to live in a pod and eat bugs, right? Mm-hmm. And they want everyone to depopulate and degrow and hold back. But we understand that humans are creative and they want to grow. And despite all these wars, we have optimism. Mm-hmm. They call them dictators because they have an economic system that is not dominated by Wall Street. Are you going to school here?
I am, yeah.
What are you studying?
American Studies.
American Studies?
Yeah.
So what does that translate to in the real world? Like
History.
History. So you'd be a history teacher?
Probably not. I don't like academia anymore.
You've heard of Free Palestine, right? Everybody says Free Palestine. Well, they supported the Palestinian struggle against the imperialist globalist system. The ambassador of Palestine to North Korea and his wife were unable to conceive. And so what's really sweet is that Kim Il-sung sent a fertility expert to help them conceive. And that's their daughter, Jong-Il, which is named after another flower. And then this is about the Iran war. Democrats and Republicans are complicit. And
I agree.
The Greater Israel, we support a peace bridge across Russia and Alaska for development instead of war.
Awesome.
What's your name? The economic system that has broken free from Wall Street We call it anti-imperialism. The economic system is globalism, imperialism, Wall Street, big banks that are waging all these wars to keep people down and keep it from developing like they're doing in West Africa right now.
Yeah.
But China broke free. They were controlled by the Japanese invaded, the British invaded. They broke free and they built 31,000 miles of high-speed rail. They have 5-year economic plans. What's happening to our bridges in America?
I don't know.
They're falling apart,
I didn't.
right? They're not investing right in that bridge.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
The Kerch Bridge from Russia to Crimea, it's indestructible. No matter how much Ukraine tries to destroy it with bombs, it's indestructible. We advocate for building a peace bridge from Russia to Alaska. And that's what the peace talks have been about. And hopefully these peace talks will have fruit this time. This is a project that's been in the works for many, many, many years. Instead of war with Russia, we would have development poles all across Alaska and Russia, and that would build the economy and just amazing stuff. And we have workshops.
Stop you, but I consider myself politically neutral, and we are Bible students. We promote God's kingdom as the solution to the problems that we're seeing in the world, as far as governments fighting governments. We're all God's people, all across the globe.
Yeah.
And so we have a global brotherhood. We have people in every country across the globe.
Yeah.
And so we promote that versus, man's government, which is so divided.
You're true. And part of that is we believe that God is the creator of all beings and that human beings have a creative spirit. We want to innovate. We want to create. And the economic system that's run by Wall Street is holding that back. They want everyone to degrow and depopulate and live in a pod and eat bugs. And we do promote the spiritual aspect of human growth. And we do believe that there is a spiritual connection.
Yeah.
And we want...
And that no one race is better than another race.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. You're right. And so we have a vision for America. We were outside the jail for Maduro, saying free Maduro. And when the siege on Palestine began, no jobs and schools for America, not weapons for Israel. So we want people to understand it's about the economic system. And we have a vision for America to just make it beautiful and everybody be able to get along. And we support countries that are breaking free of imperialism, globalism. So our founder has a vision for America that's bright and optimistic instead of all these wars. We want to partner with that system and have mass mobilization to rebuild the country, get all the unemployed, get all the troops home, build our bridges, build our schools, public ownership of natural resources so we can sell the timber and the gold and the oil on the market and invest in education and healthcare and public control of the banks. Right now we have a private bank called the Federal Reserve that lends money at interest. All these taxes are just going to the interest on the debt. And then Trump wants to $1.5 trillion for war, right? And because that's the only thing our economy is based on is war.
Yeah, we just sent all the money to go for the war, but then there's so many people in debt, there's so many people without homes, without food, and then there's little kids struggling.
Exactly, and that's because Wall Street owns our politics. And of course, the Zionist regime. We have a leader who has been around the world supporting anti-colonial, anti-imperial movements. He has spoken with Putin about the African People's Socialist Party. You remember Uhuru got raided and when Trump got raided, right? We support them. And he interviewed Ibrahim Raisi before he was mysteriously unalived. His family, Charles Finney, was a Christian pastor who was part of the mass movement of Christians against slavery. And so we're spreading a mission of hope. Instead of Wall Street that's holding back development and making all these countries poor, we want to ally with countries that are breaking free and break America free. You can, if you want to scan that, you can, or it's yeah.
Okay.
And we have a 4-point economic plan to rebuild America.
Yes, I have to run, but I'll definitely read it.
Yeah,
It's nice
yeah.
to meet you.
What's your name? In the end, everybody was very receptive to our economic plan, and they understood that Wall Street is holding us back, and they don't want these wars, and they do want development. Especially, we have all these kids that are studying and are going to be in debt for the rest of their lives, and they want to study, and they want to grow, and they want to learn, and that's what the human spirit is about. So it's been a great run.
Thank you.
Thanks again, everybody.